Thus far on the Project Commander, we've managed to change the look of our ride with easy to install aftermarket bolt-on accessories. But at this point, it's time to change the feel. So this week we'll be removing the stock suspension components in anticipation of next week's show, where we'll be installing the HCR wide arm kit. Step 1 is to jack our buggy into a safe working position, supported off the frame, allowing the suspension to completely drop out of the vehicle. Off with the tires and rims, as we won't be using the stockers any longer. If you haven't been following our build thus far, our goal is to create a competitor for the Polaris RZR XP. Now we're going to do that by the use of an HCR wide arm kit that's going to take us from a stock width of 58 inches out to a staggering 70 inches. And that doesn't include the extra offset wheels and tires are going to give us. Starting at the rear of the vehicle, I'll remove the passenger side wheel hub and disc brake caliper from the end of the trailing arm. The Commander uses only one 8.5-inch rear disc brake on the passenger side tire with a double piston caliper. Up next, we'll be changing out the stock rear steel body shocks. Now these shocks do deliver great ride compliance and they're perfectly adequate for the average rider, but they're very feature-less, only having spring preload adjustability. And not to mention, they're way too short for our new HCR trailing arms. The trailing arm design makes our shock removal very easy with access to all hardware, simple and clear. The difference between the stock shocks and the new King shocks is staggering. Not only are the shocks longer, the piston diameter, shock body, and spring coil diameters are all bigger, beefier, adding strength needed for the extra suspension travel and width. At this point, the trailing arms are now ready to come off of our Commander. On a conventional side-by-side with A-arms, you could take the axle out first, but because we have trailing arms, they're locked in, so we need to remove those trailing arms now. The four obvious inner bolts are to link the trailing arm to the sway bar. These are removed first to release the trailing arm from the sway bar. Next is the huge forward bolt that locates both the mounting point and bushing for the trailing arm. Note the size of this link as it takes all the forces from the rear suspension of this vehicle. It's now time to pop out the rear axles. Now because the CV joints on these axles are in such great shape, we're going to reuse them, send them out, and have them refitted with new, longer, and stronger rear axles. It's also important for me not to damage the boots during the removal process. These axles come out with a simple and firm pull as the circlip releases from the diff housing. Once removed, we'll have the new Summer Brothers longer axles installed on our stock CV joints and boots, ensuring the proper width for the new wider HCR suspension kit. At this point, the rear end of our Commander is clear of all of the stock suspension components and ready for the installation of our HCR wide arm kit. But first, we're going to move up front to remove all of the stock front end suspension components. First, we're going to take out the big nut that holds the axle in place, followed by the two bolts locating the disc brake caliper. We'll then slide out the upper and lower shock bolt, remove the shock completely, and move on to disconnecting the tie rod end. The remaining bolts holding the stock A-arm to the frame are pretty simple to locate and take out. Once I have the upper A-arm out, I want to take it over to the bench and show you a comparison between the new beefier A-arm and the stock tube frame, because the difference is shocking. The HCR A-arms are made of box steel and fully plated for extra bracing strength. While the weight is increased significantly, you won't be worried about bending these. The beautiful craftsmanship and clean welds are evidence of HCR's superior design and incredible quality. My final step in the disassembly process is to remove the front tie rod end. We can reuse it, but the length of the stock tie rod shaft just isn't long enough for the new 6-inch wide HCR kit. With the stock end now removed, the aluminum extension that comes with the HCR kit will be spun on and tightened up, followed by the reinstallation of the original tie rod end, securing it snugly. Later in the build, we'll adjust for alignment. At this point of the build, we're ready for the full installation of our wide arm kit. Everything came out with relative ease. There's no visible damage, so we can safely and confidently move on to stage 2 of the suspension build on the next episode of Dirt Trax.